Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of State of Cybercrime. My name is Matt Rallick, co-hosted by my dearest colleague here, Mr. Gibson, and let's get into it. So, it oftentimes in cybersecurity, it's all doom and gloom, right? There's another zero-day vulnerability or another breach, and it's going to be the thing that gets all of us. But there's often a lot of good things to say too. Most recently, there's been a real crackdown on cybercrime from both the FBI, but also the Central Bureau of Investigation, which is in India. So, with support from the FBI, the CBI arrested 43 different people in Delhi for operating a global fraud network. This syndicate, which had been active since 2022, basically impersonated legitimate entities and used malware-laden pop-ups and retrieved somewhere around $20 million. During the raid on the call center by the FBI and the CDI, they actually interrupted live cybercrime operations. So they called their operation Chakra 3. Well, they even had Interpol involved. They seized laptops and hard drives and mobile phones and all kinds of other incriminating evidence. So we'll likely see a number of guilty pleas and some charges and successful court cases here. Another win for the good guys. And David, I feel like more often than not, when we're talking about wins, we're seeing a joint cooperation between law enforcement agencies around the world. In this case, we've got the CBI, we've got the FBI, and we have Interpol all working together to take down cyber criminals.
Yeah, it's nice to see the teamwork. It's like we're getting our act together.
Yeah, yeah. But this type of coalition is one I can get behind. Now, this wasn't the only bit of good news that we had, though. I think there was something that you wanted to share too, something from the UK.
Yeah, this I was really happy to see. This is apparently the authorities in the UK have disabled a a kind of a phone spoofing system called Russian comms, and this allows attackers to easily spoof people's caller IDs. And this, I'm sure almost everybody on this call has had somebody fall for this. I actually had a relative of mine fall for this twice, where it looked like Amex was calling. And it's happening all the time. And anyway, one of these networks that was accessible via a web app and a physical phone that also came with a bunch of fake apps on it to look like a regular smartphone. They dismantled this infrastructure. I'm sure more will be popping up because there were 170,000 victims in the UK alone, and that doesn't count the victims in 107 different countries around the world. So I know that this is a huge problem. People trust their caller ID, even though we all know they shouldn't. But hey, thanks thanks UK
You said,
authorities for taking this
yeah,
down.
you said at the front there that you had a relative that went through that. I also had a relative that fell for one of these. How many people out there know someone that has fallen for one of these, I don't know what you would call them, financial fraud schemes where they either give up some bank information or they wire some money. Maybe they give up, they send a deposit somewhere expecting to get money back. I feel like I just know too many people that have fallen for this. This is the kind of thing they should be teaching in schools now, along with stuff like taxes and health and stuff like that.
Yeah, this is just so dangerous.
Oh, one person said the
Especially,
same person more than once. That's tough.
yep. It's sort of like, okay, no computers for you.
Yeah.
No.
Well, speaking of no more computers, let's jump into our next segment, AI vet, because nobody is tired of hearing about AI, the good and the bad. You're probably all sitting at home and saying AI vet to yourselves. But we'll cover some of the good, the bad, and the ugly. First and foremost, though, it's got to be the first, at least documented, successful deep fake hire. So no before, which is a US-based security awareness and training company, inadvertently, first of all, hats off to them for sharing what happened to them with everyone and being very transparent about it, and the fact that it does not appear that the attacker got any customer data. They were posing as a remote software engineer, and they actually conquered quite the interview process to avoid being caught. They had verified references. They had 4 video interviews, including one with the CEO of the company. And ultimately, what got them was they VPN'd in from a known bad mule location of bad laptops. And so this Mac that this employee had gotten shipped it was infected with malware and had connected in from a known bad location. And so with help of the FBI and Mandiant, they were able to figure out that the employee had actually tried to put a Raspberry Pi on their network in order to load load the malware and try to load the malware into KnowBe4. But quite the deep fake from a North Korean hacker, impersonating a valid, legitimate U.S. citizen with legitimate references and legitimate background, and using AI to reimage their face for the interview process. Like this is the real deal. This is a APT style threat.
Yeah, this is crazy. When we first read about this, we didn't have all these details, but then it sounds like, okay, they got through the interview process, which is impressive by itself. Then they got the Mac, and started doing their thing. My one question was, didn't they notice they were sending the Mac to North
Yeah,
Korea?
when they
But it
shipped
sounds
the Mac. Yeah.
you'd think that that might be an indicator, but it sounds like they got it shipped to somewhere that wasn't North Korea, right?
Yeah, and talking about AI, what's the deal with the AI and everything that's going on from the EU firms and AI guidance?
Yeah, this was pretty interesting. A bunch of stats from the Financial Pulse 2024 report by Sapio Research, and that it's behind an authentication wall, or you have to put in your personal information to get it. But apparently, 750 respondents from UK, Germany, France, and other European countries. They polled, and they found a few interesting things. First, finance firms are early adopters, kind of leading the charge with using AI. Kind of makes sense. There's some use cases there with fraud detection, risk management, investment management. Um, but that's just from a kind of an upside, like what are you productive with this, or what are you using it with? But in terms of the risks associated with it, I thought it was interesting. Data security was the one that was most commonly cited at 43%. Then there were also intellectual property risks and legal risks that were cited that were a little lower. The other couple interesting things, most of them had no access limitations on AI. Also, more than half lacked clear guidance on how to use AI acceptably. What can they do with it? And then like less than half said they have restrictions on what type of data can be inputted
And
into the AI models.
yeah, and I think 9 and 10 or some 90+% said that it's dangerous, and we don't know that we're doing anything to stop it. So 50% of the time it works
Yeah.
every time, and 9 times out of 10 it's dangerous. That's the that's what I glean from that. Now,
Yeah, it
speaking of, go ahead.
it's just but a lot of people are just charging ahead and using it anyway.
But the
So
regulators appear to be charging ahead too. Am I right? I mean, I
yes.
think in December we spoke about this. What's the latest on the EU AI Act?
So you're absolutely right. This was introduced in December. It has moved into the next phase as of I think August 1st, which is really now a countdown to when the rules will take effect. Now, the way the act works is it's basically categorizing AI systems with risk levels. So there's 4 of them. There's unacceptable risk, there's high risk, there's low risk, and limited risk. There are some like unacceptable risks like the proactive policing, like I thought a Minority Report when I saw that. That's going to be banned in February. So there's a ban in place in February. Most of the AI stuff is being categorized as low risk, right? Like the, chat GPTs. These are set to go into effect next August, or rules to govern their use are set to go in effect next August. The high risk ones take a little longer. These are things that would decide whether you get a loan or not. Also, autonomous robots, which I'm glad they at least made the high risk category. Those rules go into effect in 2026, and then I guess the big thing here is that there's fines associated with non-compliance. I think up to 7%
And
of
I was gonna say, and
total
it's on
revenue.
revenue. Yeah, it's on
Yeah,
revenue, not
exactly.
on
That's
profits. So
right.
that's pretty considerable. Now,
Yep.
if I remember correctly, we're gonna do a webinar on this in September. And so, for anyone that wants to go that webinar or have our team register for you, I think we're gonna launch a quick poll really quick. Um, and if you hit yes here, we'll sign you up for that webinar. And if you don't make it, we'll send you the recording. And if you hit no, you can always go up and sign up for it later. But just want to give people a chance. If you want to hear more from Varonis on the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, um, we'll have a full
Yep.
blown, I think it's an hour or 45-minute session just on that topic alone coming up in September.
Yeah, so RSVP for EU AI.
Yeah, there you go. That's a mouthful. Say that 5 times fast.
No, thank you.
Um, let's talk about, we're talking about autonomous and self-driving cars. I mean, sorry, self-driving social media. Isn't that going to just be like the greatest thing ever? Can we really do any worse with social media? Right? Like when I hear that Grok AI is getting trained on Twitter by users post without their explicit consent, meaning that like it's using by default all the things that you post on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. I think to myself, are we going to get more misinformation? Are we going to get more, is the AI going to become just as angry as it seems like everyone has come on social media? Or could it actually be better? Like, wouldn't ethical AI actually do better than humans on social media? The other thing I think about though is like, if you go pretty far down the rabbit hole here, we're getting to the point where like AI generated news on social media could, be used as like a propaganda and mind control machine in a far greater way than we used it ourselves with the algorithms over the last few years. I see a future where, Zuckerberg is in front of Congress again, and maybe Elon is in front of Congress again, testifying about like what their AI did. Curious to see what our audience thinks about that.
Yeah, but I have to say, if the most of the posts or all the posts were generated by AI and then all read by AI, maybe we could just go back to talking to each other.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true. Well, let's jump on the highway to the danger zone. And let's talk about a couple of breaches and cyber attacks that everybody should be aware of. So, most notably, Dark Angels got a record-breaking, at least according to Zscaler, a record-breaking $75 million ransom from a single victim that they claim was in the Fortune 50. Now, when we look at this, yeah, it's like another company that paid a ransom, but what it shows for me is that this is a huge business. $75 million is an enormous amount of money to either go to a person, I mean, you probably wouldn't need to work anymore, but more than that, to fund further cybercrime. We've really seen a particular increase from this group, this Dark Angels group, on manufacturing, healthcare, and technology companies. And what they're really known for is targeting large companies and exfiltrating a lot of data from those companies and then hitting them with a really, really high amount for extortion. Now, when I was setting up this show and I was talking through this attack with David, he was like, how is it possible? Like, how would you exfiltrate, let's say, 100 terabytes from one of these big companies? If you were trying to steal data from your company, how would you do it? Okay, you don't have to give us all the specifics, but like for me, I'm like, I think of, well, how many people can email them stuff to Gmail? How many people have split tunneling enabled on their computer and can just use split tunneling? How many people know that there are segments of their networks or their clouds that are unmonitored from an ingress egress standpoint, and you could just get the traffic out that way? The bigger your company is, the harder it is to get security right everywhere. And an attacker or a malicious insider only has to find that one gap in your posture to be able to get data out. And for me, like, this is a Varonis webinar, but there is nothing more than an attack like this, data theft leading to extortion, to showcase why it's so important to like lock data down at the source and monitor data at the source. Because as you move further and further away from that nucleus where all that data sits, it becomes so much harder to monitor every in and out, every transaction, every network link, or and deal with things like split tunneling on VPNs. Now, this wasn't the only one though. Now there was some this is the Dark Angels. There was ransomware. There was some denial of service attack that was worth mentioning too, right? Back in like late July.
Yeah. So late July, but I think it was actually July 30th, and I think we have a slide on it with a pretty picture of Microsoft services that leveraged Azure Front Door and Azure Content Delivery Network, which is only like rarely used services like Entra and 365 and Purview and Power BI. I don't know if anybody on the webinar is using those services. There was an outage, actually mostly in Europe. And the interesting thing, it was a run-of-the-mill DDoS attack, TCP send flood, and apparently they have about 1,700 of those a day. In this case, the normal mitigations went into effect, but they had a network misconfiguration that caused some congestion and packet loss for a lot of the Azure Front Door front ends. And essentially the network routes weren't updated correctly within one specific site in Europe. I'm curious if anybody
The tubes
experienced
got
that.
clogged and it was hard to go through the door.
Yeah,
Got it.
exactly.
Got it.
Exactly.
Got it. Yeah,
So
and for you guys that don't know, especially if you leverage any of Microsoft's DLP features, the CDN is where those files and objects typically sit that are actively being used by many employees in your company, so that it's easier and you get faster load times from a collaboration standpoint. It's like a middleware between the object store where it sits and your workstation, so that Microsoft can support that global network. So it's deeply, deeply integrated into things like 365 and Purview.
yeah,
Yeah, and go ahead.
one thing that I thought was hopeful about this, and Microsoft did a really great like after action report, and analysis, and I thought they were very transparent when I read through, hey, here's exactly what happened. I feel like it's getting to be like a flight crash in some respects, at least for the DDoS, right? 1,700 a day. They've got all kinds of automated mitigations, and several things have to go wrong together to result in this kind of outage. When they do, obviously it's horrible, but I feel like it's getting to be more like airline safety, we're getting better at these sorts of things.
Yeah, and speaking of getting better, we got a really thoughtful comment from, and I hope I pronounced this right, Abdullah Seka, who was talking about that there's a NIST special publication 800-171 that doesn't allow split tunneling for the DoD contract.
Yeah,
So it does look like the regulation is catching up to things in some ways. And then from Jerry Huff said that the U.S. East was particularly affected by this Azure denial of
yeah,
service. Yeah. And then a couple other people asking about where do we get the stories from. This one's right from Microsoft, but when we send the follow-up, we can make sure we also send some of the links of where we collect all this great information. Now, what
yeah.
is it, the Storm Bamboo? Tell me more about this. This is another
Oh
like
man.
ISP type breach, right?
Yeah, this made my head hurt. Essentially a Chinese cyber gang infiltrated an ISP and were able to, be somewhat of a man in the middle. And what they did was they took advantage of insecure software update systems, like ones that weren't appropriately using digital signatures to verify that they were talking to the right update service. And instead of getting the software update that they should have gotten, they got malware. And that gave the attackers remote control of their computers. So this is from Velexity, the threat researchers. And again, Chinese cyber espionage gang. But It's this is also another one where you've got two kind of bad things happening at once, right? You've got the compromised ISP and you've got,
The
the lack
package,
of the
you know,
signing.
the yeah, and
Yeah.
the software updates that get deployed from the compromised ISP. It's that, breach within a breach or targeting the service providers to breach the consumer. We see this a lot with, threat actors, especially Chinese APT actors, thinking back to stuff like SolarWinds. Now, those are some attacks and threat vectors I wanted you guys to be concerned about. There's also a host of newly discovered vulnerabilities, the first of which some are now saying isn't a vulnerability at all. So let's talk about the findings from Truffle Security. They termed this vulnerability that they found, or quote unquote vulnerability they found in GitHub, as cross fork object reference, which would allow someone to access sensitive data from deleted forks and deleted repositories and even private repositories on GitHub, which remain indefinitely. The way that this works is the C4, it basically allows someone to commit data back to those posts that shouldn't be visible anymore. Now, as it all turns out, many will say that while yes, it's a bad design by GitHub to not delete backups when you delete when you delete a particular repository, that you have to go and delete the backups in addition to that. There's more to do here. Um, you know, uh, eh, Leaving code out there, you could have keys in code that you need to be concerned about. You could have, I think this is more of a security awareness thing, and also just speaks to like how one little misconfig can get turned into something much greater than that, where you're not completely deleting the backups from a repo that you used to manage. And again, a lot of people coming out from Truffle and saying that it's a feature, it's not a vuln. But if you're interested to see if this applies to you, Truffle Security actually made a tool that they call Truffle Hog, which you can point at all your Git repos to
Mhm.
find those ghosted forks.
I was curious whether people prefer chocolate truffles or the truffle hog kind of truffles. So if you want to chat in, I feel like that's really important.
I'm not a big sweets person, so I'm gonna go with the Truffle Hog. I prefer sweet code over chocolate.
Understood. Understood.
What's going on with this proof point thing that we've kind of brought everybody here for?
This was another one that kind of made my head hurt. They basically there was a massive spam campaign. I'll say that 5 times fast, where end users were getting spoofed emails from notable companies. Best Buy, Nike, Walt Disney, that served as fish bait. And the way this became we got by some of the authentication mechanisms, right, that are common now, like SPF and
Yeah,
DKIM.
yeah.
It is that the attacker was running their own exchange server in an Azure environment, and then due to what is a configuration feature in Proofpoint, they routed the their emails through the outgoing the email connector, right? The what's it called? In Proofpoint, right? There's an edge mechanism, right, that
Yeah,
routes
yeah.
email, right? They basically used each company's Proofpoint server to route the mail to the victims, and because it was coming from the Azure environment, it was marked as valid,
And it
even though it
passed
wasn't.
Beacon
Yeah,
SPF because it
exactly.
came from a mail relay that has got a certificate. That makes a lot of sense. And I think
Right. So if you
they wrap this all up as echo spoofing.
That's right. Full name. Guardio Labs came up with this, or did the research on this. But essentially, how do we make an email that looks like it's coming from Disney? Well, we'll go access their Proofpoint server, which is on the web, right? It's pphosted.com, the endpoint there. Anyone that has that configuration.
Yeah. Now, when we were prepping for the show, you also brought up this SinkClose, which is a hardware vulnerability, and quite a big one. So, in AMD processors, there's this, you know, very difficult to detect, almost impossible to fix uh, vulnerability in the firmware of AMD chips dating back to 2006. So keep in mind that this vulnerability has been under wraps for just about 20 years, and that with
Yeah.
a faulty configuration, what you can do is this platform secure boot, where essentially you could put, you could flash a malicious code onto that processor and have it continue to run. And I mean, there are electric cars, gaming systems, streaming devices, smart TVs. There is absolutely so much that runs on these AMD chips. Um, it's
Yeah.
it's it seems to me like how do you how do you come out of this? Like what do you recall millions of chips? You push out
Oh.
updates. You just hope that people kind of accept it.
Well, the good news is you can open up the hood of your computer and use basically attach to the memory chip, or I guess to the processor with a hardware-based programming tool known as an SPI flash programmer. You use those all the time, right? And then you just need to scan all the memory there, and then maybe you could remove the malware. Now you got to throw the computer away. I don't know what else you can do.
Yeah, well,
It
or you get an Intel processor, right? Um, but I
right.
mean,
Well,
I
actually,
don't want to start
that
that debate on the end of the
yeah,
show here of AMD versus
exactly.
Intel. I
No,
clearly am an Intel processor person.
there apparently there are some mitigation options coming. So hopefully there will be at least some help. But yeah, the fact that they're running in some very popular makes of electric cars, is along with all. I mean, there's just so many other systems here, and
Yeah,
I don't know if you could hide this better if you tried.
right. I mean, I won't even get into the conspiracy theories that a vulnerability like this makes me think of. We promised we wouldn't do that today. Now, I did have one more story that came. Couldn't even get it into the show today, right when we were prepping. And it's just a friendly reminder that it was Patch Tuesday this week. There are 6 0 days that bundled into that Windows Patch Tuesday. Frank, I don't know if you don't mind. Can you drop that? Frank's one of our hosts, by the way, for all our audience members. Can you drop that link that Brian Krebs put out that article for? Usually we don't retweet Microsoft vulns, because everybody knows Patch Tuesday comes once a month and there's lots of vulns in it. But there are a number of 0 days in here that you should take action on if you haven't read about that or haven't seen that yet. I know a lot of organizations can sometimes deprioritize Microsoft patches, but this month looks like a doozy. And did we get any questions or anything in the chat that you want to cover before we wrap up, David? I know we had a lively chat today.
I saw a lot of comments. Oh, firmware or processor microcode. I think it's in the processor, right? Not the firmware.
Yeah, specifically, again, just trying to think back, and we'll make sure we cover this in the written summary. There's a secure mode that you can boot into on that processor, and if you flash that processor as you're booting into that secure mode, that's how you can get your malicious code to run. So I'm gonna guess that it's processor code.
Yep.
Uh, and let's
And
see if
do we
anything else. Yeah, if your AMD processor isn't from Lawrence, if your AMD processor isn't messing you up, your Microsoft updates will. Yeah, as always, this show is made possible by you, our
oh,
audience.
this one?
And so we really, really appreciate you being here. And if you wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes, giving us some feedback, we would love that. If there's something that you talked about today, you want to have a conversation with a member of the Varonis security team about it, just hit yes on that third question. And otherwise, that wraps up another episode of State of Cybercrime. Thanks so much for being here with us and making it possible to do the show. We really enjoy it. And stay tuned for our next episode.